also a question, I've heard it also on, not just on that point though, there's a legislator who also is concerned about that, legalizing marriage equality would then lead to changes in the school curriculum. There's those kinds of arguments around slippery slopes. So I think, and I think that possibly existed some changes in my Catholic schools, but not the kinds of, but they're, they're just like we talked about science textbooks and psychology textbooks changing, that's certainly a logical approach. But I definitely not to the point though. I've definitely heard it. I hear it pretty often, but it never seems to really get a lot of traction with the rank and file.
I think one of the interesting things about that argument and about any other argument you hear against same-sex marriage is how much it parallels the arguments that were raised in the miscegenation issue. What was really interesting is past year, Mildred Loving, who was the wife in Loving versus Virginia, died. There were a number of obituaries, reviewing the case, and she died just the day before there was a hearing in one of the committees, House or Senate committees on the bill, and it was absolutely eye-opening to rehear the arguments that were given back then for why interracial marriage had to be banned, and then to come to the State House and hear the exact arguments, with race changed to sexual orientation. So I think we have to look back and realize that these arguments we're hearing have predecessors, and they really need to be responded to the same way they were responded to back then.
I just want to say one thing. There is a brief that was filed in the quote-unquote same-sex divorce case to the Rhode Island Supreme Court 2 years ago. And I don't know which brief it was, but the quote-unquote argument was made that marriage equality was recognized in Rhode Island, and the next thing you know is that we would be allowing sexual relationships with corpses. As, and I'm just quoting, as reputedly allowed in other countries. Now, I don't know, I can't remember, and I don't think anyone takes those slippery slope arguments seriously on a rational level, right? But I don't think that their intent is to be rational. I think their intent is to trigger an intuitive response against the relationship in question, right? No one seriously believes that same-sex marriage is going to lead necessarily to bestiality, right? But by putting those two things together, you've already done the work of eliciting a certain kind of gut reaction towards something that is otherwise a consensual relationship, maybe same-sex marriage. So I think that they do that kind of work. They work on a level that we don't really think about.
I was wondering if you could address the issue that Jeremy brought up about incrementalism, and additionally whether you think, so some of you seem rather optimistic, whether it's necessary to have this incremental approach, or if the opposition comes primarily from Catholic voters or legislators, if that would, sort of a civil union or a civil marriage approach would be one that might be much more acceptable, if that's a way to provide.
I know last year we did have one of those incremental bills. We called it the compassion bill. And specifically what it was Jen, you can tell me more. It was about, okay. Catechism. It had to do with funeral bill and what else was it, Steve? Medical rights. I'm sorry, I don't remember it. But it was an incremental bill. And we got the same brush off on that. Then we got our marriage.
And there's a concern a lot of times with incremental steps. We have pushed for smaller bills anyway, but not much smaller, but not like a civil unions type of thing. Just because we still feel like people ought to have the right to for nursing home visitation, et cetera, along the way. But you do have, there is somebody out there who's coming to school. And when you get something happen, they're saying, well, you guys got that last year, we're not going to do this year. And that's always been my fear on a purely political level. But then I think Chairman Lynch said it too. We separate but equal is not equal. So I'd say that I do want to say, I want to also point out that you were saying, talking it's not just Roman Catholics. I think there's just some more conservative religious beliefs needs that drive things for folks. I want to clarify that too. I don't want to, I'm sorry if I mischaracterized that. I think there's definitely folks that are also very religious that aren't Catholic that are opposed to this as well, that have those beliefs.
I think we're beyond the time of incrementalism, at least when it comes to the issue of marriage versus something else. I think it's certainly true. In the meantime, there are specific, discrete issues that can be worked on, but Representative Furry is absolutely right. There was actually a domestic partner bill that passed 2 or 3 years ago that the governor vetoed. And you hear the arguments from the other side, well, why don't we just give them the same benefits and forget about giving the term marriage? But in fact, when push comes to shove, a lot of proponents don't want to give domestic partners similar rights as well. In terms of the broader issue, I think before the Massachusetts decision really was groundbreaking, there was a lot of debate within the community and outside the community, certainly within the civil liberties community, about going for civil unions versus marriage. From my perspective, the Massachusetts decision changed all that, and it's only increased with more and more court decisions. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, we have these strategic decisions and it's good to go incrementally, but when you now have a number of courts saying that it is a violation of the Constitution not to treat same-sex marriage the same as others, I think the time has passed to settle on second best, and settle on second best when it comes to basic constitutional rights that a number of courts have now explicitly found.
Thank you very much for being here. I work at a law office that's very Catholic, and there's been just this presumption that Rhode Island is such a Catholic state that this will never pass. They might have something nominally equivalent, but just randomly I came across a Brown University Press that talked about a survey that found that, contrary to my own presumptions, that there was huge support in all different age ranges. That unfortunately they didn't list in the press release in regards to religious affiliation, but 60% in terms of civil unions gay marriage is 75% in civil unions. And I want to know to what extent behind in the closed doors of the legislature that people talk about either this study. This was in May 2009, because it seems to me their argument would be, well, my constituents don't want X. But if this, which presumably cuts across religious boundaries or affiliations, shows overwhelming support, it just doesn't seem right. I mean, I don't know what the numbers are. You say 31 are co-sponsoring the bill, correct? Out of
75.
Yeah, so I don't know to what extent. Okay, first, have you heard of this study from Taubman Center for Public Policy? And how has that affected the discussion since May?
I don't think it's affected it too much. One of the things I was saying about is you get yelled at by your constituents on things, no matter which way you vote on.
So that's the thing that
But let me just finish, because again, it's not 60% of people that yell at you. It's actually 1% or 0.5% or 1/4%. There was an issue, I remember getting 50 phone calls over the course of a weekend. 50 people, 50 households. It's a pretty small fraction of my district. The idea is that they're probably a representative of a large group, and they were all very upset with me about something. It's off track from what we're going to talk about. But so in the end, that's what people mean a lot of times on the way. I think, though, that they actually don't believe that poll. That poll's not about my district. That poll's about the state. That poll's not about voters. That's the kind of, you'll get people that will rationalize why that poll doesn't matter. People are hypersensitive about polls when they go in their direction, and they find ways to get around them. But I think it was an exciting poll when we saw it come out in May for a lot of, Frank and I, a lot of folks made sure we got the information out to people about it along the way. But in the end, I think it's more of a demonstration about where the state is and where the state can go than it is something that changes legislative minds.